A young man gazes in awe as the All Book, a tome containing all the world's knowledge, springs open before him. He stares in utter disbelief, questioning if this mythical artifact is truly what it seems. Without warning, the ground erupts as a colossal, gnarled tree monster bursts forth into the battlefield. The party springs into action, shouting incantations as they prepare to face the towering beast. Magnus, the party's sorcerer, steps forward and unleashes a powerful Tier 3 fire spell against the creature. Eugene sharply scolds Magnus, pointing out that his fiery assault is completely useless against the beast. The arrogant 16-year-old warrior, blessed by God Tygon, relentlessly berates Magnus for his incompetence. Magnus argues that fire should logically destroy a plant-type monster, while a frustrated comrade demands they try other elemental magic instead. The young sorcerer insists that blindly following standard theory in reality could ultimately work against them if the monster possesses unique traits. Refusing to listen, Eugene aggressively orders Magnus to shut his mouth and blindly follow his lead. As Magnus prepares another blazing strike, the fearless warriors charge straight toward the looming threat. A vicious strike from the monster sends Eugene flying backward with an agonizing scream. Magnus grits his teeth and curses in frustration as his powerful flames fail to leave even a single scorch mark on the creature's bark. Hilda the priestess desperately rushes to the fallen warrior's side to heal his grievous wounds. As the healing magic washes over him, Eugene praises Hilda's reliability while simultaneously mocking the sorcerer as entirely useless. Hilda smiles warmly, declaring it her solemn duty to keep her brave warrior fully restored in the heat of battle. Misha suddenly screams at the pair, demanding their immediate attention. The fierce female fighter angrily scolds Eugene and Hilda for shamelessly flirting instead of focusing on the perilous battle. With a final coordinated effort, the party successfully defeats the Death Trent as its massive form crumbles into dust. A greedy Eugene immediately rushes to collect the scattered fruit drops, aggressively warning his teammates not to steal any of the precious loot. Later that night, in the Lacusta Kingdom's provincial town, a brooding Magnus stares at an apple still haunted by his spell's failure to scratch the monster. The victorious group of warriors celebrates their grand return from the adventure, boasting about the massive score they secured. Sitting around a tavern table piled high with their fruity spoils, the party excitedly wonders if the loot will truly increase their core stats. Eugene takes charge of the distribution, eagerly handing the fruits of strength, agility, and reflexes over to Misha to test. Misha takes a tentative bite of the colorful fruit, her eyes instantly widening in pure amazement. Experiencing a sudden surge in her physical abilities, she marvels at the incredible effects while the others clamor for a taste. Eugene selfishly claims the armor, speed, and stamina fruits for himself, casually tossing the holy and magic power fruits to a grateful Hilda. Although tempted by the magic energy fruit for himself, so Eugene decides to leave it so Hilda can boost her vital healing spells. Seeing only one magic fruit remaining, a quiet Magnus naturally assumes the final prize belongs to him. To the sorcerer's absolute shock, a grinning Eugene loudly declares that he will be taking the last fruit for himself. A baffled Magnus demands to know why a purely physical warrior would ever need to increase his magical energy reserves. Eugene smugly explains that extra mana will let him spam his warrior skills more often, a flawless logic that Hilda eagerly supports. Adding insult to injury, Hilda coldly reminds Magnus that he provided absolutely no notable assistance during the fight against the Trant. Misha chimes in with her agreement, ruthlessly stating that rewards must be earned, and the sorcerer deserves nothing. Magnus silently clenches his fist in rage, knowing he could have inflicted serious damage if his stubborn teammates had just allowed him to cast different spells. The party members openly whisper their regrets, complaining that recruiting a supposed genius sorcerer turned out to be a massive disappointment. Eugene sneers as he realizes that Magnus's only actual contribution to their prestigious party is his rare ability to read the holy sigils. The arrogant warrior leans in and bluntly calls Magnus completely worthless aside from his translation skills. Gloating over his own superiority, Eugene concludes that physical strength is everything in battle and brands the sorcerer a useless bum. The tavern erupts into cruel, mocking laughter as the entire party revels in humiliating their silenced teammate. Eugene coldly tells Magnus they have no use for his kind anymore and forcefully orders him to get lost. Magnus stares back in silent, stunned disbelief as his former comrades mercilessly turn their backs on him. Walking away from the noisy tavern, Magnus listens as the party loudly declares they only need physical power, wondering if he should just leave like that. He stubbornly decides they can think whatever they want, ignoring Misha's cruel remark that walking away is a coward's choice. Wandering the moonlit streets, the young sorcerer gloomily wonders what his days will be like from now on, heavily burdened by the expectations of his hometown. He recalls the proud headmaster of the city academy wishing him the best, believing it was Magnus's duty to represent all sorcerers, save the world, and defeat the Demon King. Clenching his jaw, Magnus resolves that he simply cannot return home in such a disgraceful state. Suddenly, a traveling merchant chases after the young sorcerer, desperately calling for him to wait a moment. The breathless man stops and happily points out that he remembers seeing Magnus back at the tavern. Chuckling nervously, the merchant admits it was impolite to eavesdrop but confirms he heard the returning warriors gossiping about the young mage. Intrigued, Magnus asks what caught his attention, prompting the man to reveal he heard the sorcerer can comprehend the holy sigils. Nodding in understanding, the merchant cheerfully mentions he has a very special book he would like to show him. With a wide grin, the man holds out a thick, mysterious tome covered in strange symbols, asking if it piques the sorcerer's interest. Magnus's eyes widen in sheer amazement as he instantly recognizes the cover's glowing markings as the legendary holy sigils. The merchant tells the stunned boy to relax, revealing that the encyclopedia was written by the gods themselves and contains everything needed to defeat Demon King Morphi. A confident smirk spreads across Magnus's face as he realizes just how incredibly interesting this divine artifact truly is. He recalls the legend that only the gods and their apostles can understand these sigils, meaning he himself must be one of those chosen few. Knowing there are many ways to forge a normal book, Magnus is absolutely certain that a tome created directly by the gods is a completely different story. Magnus eagerly asks for the price, but the merchant kindly insists he intended it as a divine gift and will accept whatever spare coins the boy can offer. Dropping a few coins into the merchant's open palm, Magnus asks if the small amount is enough to secure the legendary text. Later that quiet night, the moon shines brightly over the building where Magnus has secured a room to study his new prize. The book reveals that all of the world's monsters are born from Demon King Morphi's dark energy, meaning they will endlessly respawn under the right conditions as long as their king lives. Sweating with disbelief, Magnus realizes this incredible book actually contains absolute knowledge about everything in the world. Crouched on his bedroom floor, the young sorcerer excitedly pieces together the dark truth behind the monster outbreaks. It suddenly makes perfect sense to him why monsters they had previously defeated always seemingly came back from the dead. Tracing his finger along the pages, a specific entry catches his eye and makes him pause in total confusion. 3 days later, Magnus hides nervously in the bushes as massive roots abruptly erupt from the earth right in front of him. A towering, monstrous death trent rises from the shattered ground, roaring menacingly into the forest canopy. Stepping out from cover, the lone sorcerer grips his staff and confronts the freshly spawned death trent head-on. Magnus gasps in shock, deeply amazed that the book's bizarre instructions actually worked perfectly. He recalls the ridiculous-sounding passage that promised a new death trent would spawn on the hill north of Enzo Village exactly 3 days after planting a seed in an infected area. A confident grin spreads across his face as he tightens his grip on his staff and prepares to initiate his daring plan. Magnus excitedly braces himself for his epic, completely solo battle against the infamous plant monster. Realizing the massive creature is distracted and hasn't noticed him yet, Magnus takes the perfect opportunity to strike. Channeling his magical energy, the sorcerer loudly casts a powerful sleep spell directly at the roaring beast. While everyone previously believed the Death Trent was completely immune to special magic and weakening spells, the monster immediately starts to nod off. Magnus confidently explains that every single monster has a specific type of spell it cannot resist, and this particular boss is extremely susceptible to hypnosis. According to his divine encyclopedia, the plant-type boss has complete resistance to fire magic but holds a critical fatal weakness to lightning, activating his magical interface to boost his single target and critical damage by 5 times. Magnus focuses entirely on casting his devastating lightning spells. A smug smile crosses his face as he remembers Eugene's foolish, arrogant insistence that fire was obviously the best strategy against the creature. Triumphant and brimming with newfound confidence, Magnus proudly declares that Eugene was entirely wrong. Standing amidst crackling lightning, the young mage admits he should have trusted his own instincts instead of blindly following orders. Metaphorical chains shatter around him as he firmly resolves to use his own mind and power to defeat the Demon King without letting anyone restrain his judgment again. Gripping his staff with fierce determination, Magnus swears to prove that sorcerers are the most powerful class and to make the entire world remember his name. He recalls a divine passage explaining that the supreme gods will never directly interfere in mortal affairs, regardless of the dire situation. The encyclopedia explicitly states it only provides information, praising those who stand on their own 2 feet and boldly carve out their own fate with courage and wisdom. Snapping back to the present battle, Magnus unleashes a fierce, guttural incantation as volatile magical energy wildly converges around his staff. Leaping aggressively into the air, the empowered sorcerer casts a devastating, greatly enhanced thunder spell directly at the massive creature. The colossal Death Trent lets out a final, agonizing groan before completely crumbling into a pile of ash and dropping a massive bounty of glowing fruit. System notifications suddenly flood the young mage's vision, announcing a massive surge to level 24 alongside incredible boosts to his magic, health, speed, and holy power. Wide-eyed and trembling with sheer adrenaline, Magnus marvels at the incredible amount of experience gained and the significant, undeniable surge in his overall strength. Surrounded by floating loot drops, a thrilled Magnus gleefully clutches the divine encyclopedia. Realizing the extraordinary artifact is truly the absolute real deal? Having defeated 8 Death Trents, Magnus reviews the powerful new magic abilities he acquired from the battle. He eagerly devours the stat-boosting fruit, leveling up to 28 while consulting his divine encyclopedia. Holding his worn-out rank D staff, Magnus realizes he urgently needs better equipment to match his rapid growth. He laments that higher-ranked magic staves are not only incredibly rare but would also cost him an absolute fortune. The young sorcerer sighs heavily, feeling momentarily hopeless about his dire financial situation. Suddenly, an amazing entry in his divine book catches his eye and completely changes his mood. Brimming with confidence, Magnus stands atop a tiled roof and declares he has found the right place. He gazes down at a massive, overgrown mansion bathed in the sunlight. Gripping his staff, the determined mage slips silently into the dark, abandoned chimney. Using a levitation spell, Magnus smoothly floats down the long vertical shaft. He praises the convenience of the spell, relieved he remembered how to safely control his descent. Drifting downward, he excitedly wonders what true flight feels like, noting he can learn the spell at level 29. Magnus touches down softly in a dusty fireplace, declaring his infiltration a complete success. He confidently strides through the empty halls, confirming the book's claim that the King of Staff's residence is abandoned. He recalls that the mansion's former owner was widely considered the strongest sorcerer in the entire Lacusta kingdom. Finding the legendary mage's skeletal remains on a table, Magnus remembers how the man was left to die alone 10 years ago. Magnus carefully claims his prize, a legendary rank S artifact known as the Staff of the Supreme. He marvels at the weapon's flawless construction, amazed by how light its pure mithril handle feels. Examining the staff closely, he is absolutely stunned by the massive, incredibly rare red crystal inlaid at its head. Magnus realizes the staff is practically priceless, guessing it would cause a buying frenzy even at 100,000 coins. Chuckling in disbelief, he calculates that selling the artifact would allow him to live like a wealthy noble for 5 centuries. Beyond its monetary value, Magnus reads that the staff also possesses absolutely incredible magical enhancements. The artifact provides massive boosts to spell damage and enhancement magic while significantly reducing mana costs. Clenching his fists in sheer joy, the ecstatic sorcerer celebrates his incredible new weapon. Emerging from the ruined mansion at dawn, Magnus pauses to watch the sunrise over the distant kingdom. He respectfully asks the deceased King of Staffs for permission to borrow the legendary artifact. Magnus solemnly vows to return the staff to the mage's grave once he has vanquished the Demon King and brought peace to the land. Using the encyclopedia's precise knowledge, Magnus spends his time raiding nefarious groups to collect every rare item in the kingdom. During his raids, the heroic sorcerer also liberates several young girls from the cruel clutches of slavery. The battered girls clasp their hands and express their profound gratitude to their savior. Magnus blushes deeply, suddenly realizing he has absolutely zero immunity to the pure, grateful gazes of cute girls. Flustered and embarrassed, he humbly refuses to give his name, and instead offers to escort them safely home. When a girl asks him to wait, Magnus quickly escapes, reasoning that a wanted thief shouldn't show his face too much. Walking away through the bustling streets, he hopes that maybe someday he will cross paths with them again. Later, a cross-legged Magnus sits in his room overwhelmed by the sheer number of rank C staves he acquired. Surrounded by a massive horde of magical weapons, he decides to keep the best gear for himself and sell the rest. He quickly realizes that flooding the market with rare C-rank items would instantly raise dangerous suspicions. Stroking his chin in deep thought, Magnus knows he must find the perfect time and place to safely fence his loot. Knowing he needs a prestigious and trustworthy buyer, the young sorcerer sets out to find a reliable merchant. He finally arrives at his destination, confidently standing before the grand entrance of the Mall Merchants Association. Standing before the Grand Mall Merchants Association, Magnus admires the kingdom's largest hub for trading and crafting magic weapons. Eugene curses in frustration as the massive shop lacks the item they seek, while Hilda and Misha urge the impatient warrior to calm down. The angry warrior suddenly stops in his tracks as he spots a familiar face in the bustling crowd. Magnus observes a fiercely agile catgirl walking with his former party, admitting to himself that they found his replacement remarkably fast. Eugene shoots a dark, intensely irritated glare at his former teammate, who merely stares back with a blank, unbothered expression. Unfazed by the hostility, Magnus casually greets his old party and asks what they are buying, only to be rudely shut down by Eugene. As the dismissed sorcerer smoothly turns to walk away, Misha quickly stops Eugene and insists they might actually need his help. Misha and Hilda eagerly point out that a sorcerer might know exactly where to find magic gear, reluctantly convincing their stubborn leader to ask for advice. Pausing his departure, a visibly confused Magnus glances over his shoulder and asks what the physical combat party could possibly want from him. Swallowing his immense pride, Eugene desperately explains they are hunting for a rare magic staff and asks if the sorcerer knows where to find one. Magnus casually responds that he actually knows exactly where to look, revealing he has over 10 magical staves sitting right in his personal storage. Eugene completely loses his cool, screaming in wild excitement as he aggressively demands to know where they can buy the coveted weapons. Ignoring the outburst, Magnus calmly questions why a party that openly despises magic users would ever need to hunt down a sorcerer's weapon. Eugene rudely barks that they are fulfilling a special request for a noble named Demid, completely failing to ask for the favor with any actual respect. Sensing the rising tension, Hilda steps forward with her hands clasped in prayer, sweetly begging Magnus to reveal the location of the staves. Reaching into his robes, the clever sorcerer suddenly produces a pristine magic staff and offers to sell it directly to his desperate former comrades. The desperate priestess immediately offers a massive sum of 1,200 coins, while Eugene arrogantly gloats that the sorcerer is finally being useful. Narrowing his eyes suspiciously, Magnus bluntly questions if the ragtag party actually possesses that kind of extreme wealth. Sweating nervously, Hilda admits the Holy Church itself is directly funding their grand quest to defeat the Demon King. Magnus lowers his eyes in quiet realization, fully understanding exactly where their sudden, massive budget is originating from. He mentally sneers at the corrupt church, remembering how the supposedly loving priests ruthlessly extort massive sums of gold from the poor for basic healing. Knowing the money is essentially stolen from innocent people, the young mage comfortably decides he can overcharge the party without a single shred of guilt. Flashing a confident peace sign, Magnus happily agrees to the outrageous price of 1,200 coins while Hilda rejoices in sheer relief. Despite the priestess's fake radiant smile, Magnus secretly knows they are burning with absolute humiliation for having to bow to the teammate they previously mocked. As the transaction concludes, the brilliant sorcerer quietly wonders why his former party would go to such extreme, desperate lengths just to acquire a basic C-rank item. Snatching the staff with a wicked, triumphant grin, Eugene eagerly asks if the clueless sorcerer wants to know the real reason behind their massive purchase. The arrogant warrior loudly brags that the wealthy noble promised to trade them a legendary mithril sword in exchange for the basic staff. Throwing his head back in hysterical laughter, Eugene gloats that the magical sword is worth at least 5,000 coins on the open market. The victorious warrior flashes a cruel, mocking smirk, fully expecting the swindled sorcerer to burst into tears of sheer regret over the lost profit. Instead of crying, Magnus offers a flat, completely unimpressed congratulation that instantly wipes the smug grin right off Eugene's face. The entire party stares in absolute jaw-dropping shock, failing to realize that Magnus simply does not care about their petty, manipulative profit. See, Magnus secretly scoffs at their meager prize, knowing he already owns 6 mithril swords and a vastly superior A-rank thunderblade hidden away in his room. Flashing a completely unbothered, gentle smile, the immensely wealthy sorcerer simply shrugs off the weak taunt and prepares to leave. Brushing casually past his frozen former leader, Magnus brightly wishes the struggling party the best of luck on their impossible quest. As the sorcerer steadily walks into the distance, a desperate Misha calls out and asks if he still refuses to rejoin their glorious ranks. Pausing his stride, the newly empowered mage throws a glance over his shoulder and bluntly asks why he would ever lower himself to return. Seeing Misha pout like a strangely sulking child, Magnus finally turns his back on his past and walks boldly toward his bright, independent future. Stepping into the bustling Mall Merchant Association, Magnus looks around the massive hall and wonders which stall is best for selling his magical loot. The young sorcerer suddenly stops in his tracks as a familiar, surprised voice calls out to him from behind. Turning around, Magnus instantly recognizes the girl as one of the terrified captives he recently rescued from the slave dealers. Without a shred of hesitation, the blushing girl boldly demands that the stunned sorcerer go out with her. A completely bewildered Magnus stares at her with wide eyes, caught off guard by the sudden public confession. Realizing the massive amount of attention they are drawing, Magnus quickly escorts the heavily panting girl into a quiet, secluded alleyway. He gently chides her for shouting such an embarrassing request in public, warning that it will only make things awkward for them both. The flustered girl bows her head and hastily apologizes, explaining that she simply lost control of her overwhelming emotions. Sweating nervously, Magnus internally panics about how to stop her from exposing his mildly illegal bandit looting activities to the entire town. Misinterpreting his silent anxiety, the teary-eyed girl timidly asks if her sudden presence is bothering him. Shaking off his dark thoughts, Magnus reassures her and curiously asks why she is currently working at the Merchant Association. The proud girl reveals she is actually the daughter of the large merchant group's owner, vowing not to let this second chance slip away. Introducing herself as Arya, she cheerfully explains that her bold confession was driven by a desperate desire to repay him for saving her life. Magnus stares back in stunned silence, completely overwhelmed by her intense, tearful earnestness. The cynical sorcerer mentally panics, refusing to believe that such a ridiculously perfect romantic scenario could actually happen to him. Forcing himself to stay calm, Magnus crosses his arms and stubbornly reminds himself that a true sorcerer must never rush to conclusions. Arya misreads his hesitation and desperately leans in, breathlessly asking if he wants something more intimate than just a simple date. Magnus leans back in sheer shock as the eager merchant's daughter suddenly closes the distance between them. Stepping back, Arya solemnly recounts the absolute devastation and terror she felt when she was kidnapped and thrown into a dark cell. She gazes at him with deep admiration, vividly remembering the exact moment he bravely burst into the dungeon to save them. The grateful girl praises his graceful yet fierce strength, declaring him a true hero for rescuing every single captive without hesitation. Despite meeting countless people through her prestigious job, Arya confesses that he is the most incredible person she has ever encountered. Defeated by her pure, unyielding gaze, an exhausted Magnus sighs and realizes he simply cannot turn her away. He honestly admits that as a young man, he is definitely interested in exploring a relationship with her. Closing his eyes solemnly, the sorcerer decides he must reveal the dangerous, heavy burden of his vow to slay the Demon King. To his absolute horror, a severely flustered Magnus accidentally blurts out that he has zero romantic experience with women instead of mentioning his grand quest. Steam practically erupts from the sorcerer's head as he internally screams at himself for panicking and making such a humiliating confession. Arya wildly waves her hands in a shared panic, loudly admitting that she also has no experience and that he is actually her first. Coughing into his hand to hide his deep embarrassment, Magnus awkwardly agrees to the date while warning her that his inexperience might make it boring. Arya's face instantly lights up with pure radiant joy at his hesitant but genuine acceptance. Clasping her hands together, Aishi warmly reassures him that she doesn't mind his inexperience at all since it will be a brand new journey for them both. The devoted girl softly vows that she wouldn't mind offering everything she has as long as it is given directly to him. A deeply touched Magnus blushes and flashes a gentle smile, genuinely moved by her innocent and earnest devotion. Regaining his heroic composure, the young man formally reintroduces himself as Magnus. Arya gasps in shock, instantly recognizing his name and asking if he is the famous sorcerer from the legendary Heroes Party. Magnus casually laughs off his past, while a furious Arya defends his incredible strength, boldly calling his former comrades absolute fools for kicking him out. The pair stand in an awkward but entirely comfortable silence, both suddenly unsure of how to actually initiate their promised date. Breaking the quiet tension, a blushing Arya nervously suggests they meet up on her upcoming day off next Wednesday. Magnus softly agrees to the Wednesday date, securing their future plans as they stand together in the sunlit alleyway. Watching her leave, a devious Magnus internally celebrates, knowing that befriending the chief merchant's daughter will perfectly hide his secret bandit looting while instantly securing his immense wealth. Magnus lies awake in bed, musing that a truly fulfilling life should be defined by more than just cold business and benefits. He blushes intensely while reflecting on his rescue mission, technically satisfied that he never actually told Arya any lies. Rolling around his mattress in a state of romantic euphoria, the young sorcerer squeals about the novelty of his first pure love. The following Wednesday reveals a vibrant and densely packed southern district, teeming with city life under a clear sky. Navigating the busy thoroughfare, Magnus recalls dating manual strategies suggesting that men should arrive early to gain a tactical advantage. He scoffs at the illogical nature of the advice and resolves that arriving exactly on time is the only superior strategy. Spotting Arya waiting at the fountain, Magnus quickly feigns a casual arrival and claims he only just reached the spot himself. Arya dashes toward him with a radiant expression, her genuine excitement instantly breaking through the sorcerer's calculated composure. The girl beams with joy and admits she was so thrilled for their date that she has been waiting at the plaza since sunrise. Magnus leads her away to find a local establishment he discovered, promising a lunch menu that is nothing short of amazing. Arya claps her hands in delight, expressing how truly happy she is to be spending her first real date with him. A wave of anxiety crashes over Magnus as he contemplates the immense social pressure of initiating hand-holding during their stroll. He begins to sweat and panic, his mind racing with a million different ways that attempting such intimacy could fail. Their fingers brush together in a moment of electric tension until Arya boldly takes the initiative and firmly interlocks her hand with his. Magnus experiences an incredible surge of happiness as Arya pulls him along. Saw her warm touch leaving him dazed and excited. Blushing and completely smitten, the sorcerer realizes that girls are truly awesome as they disappear into the bustling city crowd. Arya asks if he has ever sampled the local shop's pancakes, declaring them to be her absolute favorite treat. He admits it is his first time visiting the cafe, though he feels a surge of confidence from her enthusiastic presence. A waiter serves their steaming meal while Magnus mentions he chose the location specifically for her to enjoy its famous flavors. The two settle in to share a feast of golden fruit-topped pancakes and crispy bacon in the middle of their perfect date. Arya praises the bakery's excellent cakes, noting that keeping its presence a secret prevents it from getting an unnecessary reputation. She explains that avoiding massive crowds perfectly preserves the cozy atmosphere and protects the customer's delicate appetites. Magnus takes a bite and excitedly notes how the rich omelet perfectly elevates the entire dish's flavor profile. The young sorcerer closes his eyes in pure bliss, savoring the salty butter perfectly mixing with the crispy bacon. Holding her cheek in sheer delight, Arya, happily munching away, declares the food is so incredibly delicious she could melt. As Arya praises the sweet apples and sour berries enhancing her soft pancake, Magnus eagerly asks if they can split their dishes to taste everything. Magnus proudly smiles, internally celebrating that finding this incredible hidden gem was entirely worth the difficult search. Walking through the sunlit streets after their meal, Arya laughs brightly and proclaims it was the most delicious food she has ever eaten. The cheerful girl tightly hooks her arm around Magnus, eagerly asking where her heroic date will take her next. Magnus's face flushes as he feels the undeniable soft pressure of her chest pressing directly against his arm. A completely flustered Magnus awkwardly tries to maintain his composure, while Arya leans into him with a radiant, oblivious smile. The rest of their date passes in a whirlwind of shared meals, exciting discoveries, and late-night tavern visits. Stopping beneath the night sky, Arya sincerely thanks Magnus for providing her with such an incredibly fun and unforgettable day. When Magnus suggests the wonderful date serves as enough compensation for saving her, Arya stubbornly insists she still owes him a proper reward. Bounding away playfully, the merchant's daughter asks him to promise they will definitely go out together again in the near future. In a breathtaking instant, Arya closes the distance and plants a deep, sudden kiss directly onto the stunned sorcerer's lips. Pulling back slightly, the flushed girl leaves Magnus frozen in total wide-eyed shock. Blushing intensely, Arya shyly asks if that sudden, intimate moment was actually the great sorcerer's very first kiss. Without waiting for an answer, the heavily blushing girl turns and sprints away into the moonlit city streets. Touching his lips with trembling fingers, a completely overwhelmed Magnus internally screams in panic over the fact that he just got kissed. Once he finally calms down, Magnus pulls out his divine encyclopedia, Gratefully acknowledging that the legendary book guaranteed his date's massive success, he reveals the magical tome features an entire chapter dedicated to important people, including a highly detailed profile on the influential Arya. Utilizing the encyclopedia's precise knowledge of her personality and favorite things, Magnus confidently states they will surely have another perfect date next time. Gazing warmly into the distance, the sorcerer genuinely admits that as long as Arya is happy, he is completely fine with how things turned out. Holding the glowing artifact under the starry sky, Magnus declares his divine encyclopedia to be an incredibly useful tool for both battles and romance. Lying comfortably on his bed, Magnus flips through his book and wonders what his next move should be now that he has found most of the hidden items. The young sorcerer gasps in absolute shock when a sudden sub-quest appears in the text, directing him to save a girl named Mel in Enzo Village. He vividly remembers Mel as an ordinary 14-year-old country girl who was hopelessly bedridden with a bizarre disease. The strange illness had proven entirely resistant to all forms of treatment, completely unfazed even by the power of holy healing magic. Magnus clenches his fist as he recalls the bitter memory of his past helplessness, knowing there was absolutely nothing he could do for her back then. The magical encyclopedia reveals the illness is actually a demonic beast's curse, prompting a determined Magnus to grab his staff and immediately set out for the village to slay the creature. Arriving at his destination, Magnus faces the stunned Enzo Village chief, who fearfully asks if the young sorcerer truly intends to fight the forest beast completely alone. Magnus calmly confirms his solo mission, explaining that he ended up parting ways with his former companions due to personal reasons. The chief nods in understanding and praises Magnus as a great sorcerer, while the young man humbly brushes off the compliment. Magnus respectfully requests a place to stay for a while, and the grieving chief gladly offers his home, revealing he has spare room after his son's entire family recently succumbed to a plague. Hearing the tragic mention of the local illness, an intrigued Magnus gently steers the conversation toward the mysterious plague. The desperate chief asks if this has something to do with his bedridden granddaughter, prompting Magnus to caution that he isn't completely certain yet. Despite his mild hesitation, the confident sorcerer clearly states his belief that defeating the forest creature will completely cure the girl's disease. The stunned chief slams his hands on the table and leaps to his feet in sheer disbelief, begging to know if the miraculous news is actually true. Realizing his sudden outburst, the overwhelmed old man quickly slumps back into his chair and tearfully apologizes for his impolite behavior. Staring at the desperate man, Magnus mentally admits that claiming to be uncertain is a massive overstatement, knowing his divine book is absolutely flawless. And the young sorcerer secretly decides it is best to quickly defeat the boss and leave immediately after saving Mel. He firmly wishes to avoid making the poor family feel heavily indebted to him, reasoning that a swift departure will prevent any unnecessary complications. Blushing deeply as he recalls his recent romantic encounters, Magnus forcefully vows to steer entirely clear of any more awkward situations. Later, a massive crowd of villagers surrounds the departing sorcerer, loudly cheering him on and begging him to save their beloved Mel. A sweating Magnus shoots an irritated glare at the chuckling chief, realizing the old man completely leaked their private discussion to the entire village. Stomping away from the crowd, the young mage mentally complains that their intense expectations have turned a basic, easy job into a nerve-wracking ordeal. Shaking off his nerves, Magnus marches steadily down the quiet dirt path leading straight toward the ominous forest. Hearing a sudden rustle in the nearby foliage, Magnus abruptly stops and sharply demands the hidden stalker reveal their identity. A heavily scarred, armored warrior suddenly bursts from the bushes and respectfully drops to one knee before the surprised sorcerer. Magnus silently narrows his eyes, carefully analyzing the rugged warrior's face for any sign of hostility. To the kneeling warrior's absolute surprise, Magnus smoothly identifies him as Glance. Without a single moment of hesitation, Glance respectfully bows his scarred face, expressing deep honor that the great mage recognized a simple Enzo Village guard. The smug sorcerer mentally praises his own incredible memory, perfectly recalling the exact spot the armored man was standing in the village crowd earlier. The desperate warrior formally begs for permission to assist in the upcoming boss fight, leaving Magnus visibly stunned by the bold request. Glaring upward with intense, unwavering determination, the scarred warrior fiercely pleads with the young mage to accept his assistance. Magnus silently assesses the kneeling man's posture and worn equipment, noting that he possesses the undeniable aura of a seasoned combat veteran. Crossing his arms, the cautious sorcerer directly questions if the guard is driven by a desire for loot or a basic responsibility toward the village. The hardened warrior looks away with a faint blush, honestly confessing that his only true motive is to save Mel. As the pair ventures deeper into the forest, Glance softly explains that he and the bedridden girl are actually close childhood friends. Magnus suffers a massive internal crisis, completely baffled that the incredibly rugged, mature-looking guard is actually 18 years old just like himself. Staring somberly ahead, Glance confesses his deep romantic love for Mel, while admitting he lacks the courage to actually tell her how he feels. The warrior grips his armored chest in sorrow, revealing a deep-seated insecurity about his heavily scarred and intimidating appearance. Glance proudly declares that he left to fight in the military and returned as a guard solely to become strong enough to protect the woman he loves. Magnus smiles warmly at his new companion, genuinely impressed by the scarred warrior's incredible, unwavering dedication. Glance states he couldn't just sit around doing nothing after hearing the plan. Expressing deep worry for Mel's illness, Magnus confirms he is already aware of Glance's feelings, but warns the scarred warrior that the upcoming battle will be extremely dangerous. Reminding Glance that a sorcerer cannot protect him during close combat, Magnus bluntly tells the guard to act as a frontline meat shield. Magnus pauses in silent awe, genuinely surprised that the village guard is willing to sacrifice so much for the mission. Stepping firmly forward, Glance bravely declares he has absolutely no regrets even if he loses his life, provided he can save Mel. The determined warrior tightening his grip feels that his years of relentless swordsmanship practice were entirely preparation for this exact day. Seeing the guard's unwavering persistence, Magnus finally agrees to the team up, secretly noting that a vanguard perfectly complements his sorcerer class. Standing back to back with the armored guard, the young mage mentally empathizes with Glance's desperate desire to protect the woman he loves. Glancing sideways, Magnus silently acknowledges that despite his brave words, no man truly wishes to throw his life away. With a confident grin, Magnus beckons Glance over so they can properly discuss their combat strategy before facing the boss. As they sit on a fallen log, Magnus outlines the basic plan while Glance carefully absorbs the tactical details. Drawing in the dirt with a stick, Magnus deduces that the armored guard's combat skills roughly place him around level 7 or 9. Glance realizes the sorcerer possesses the rare stats inspection skill, though Magnus admits he can only read general information. The mage explains they must bridge a massive power gap since their demonic opponent is level 19, far outclassing the decent village guard. Heavy, ominous footsteps suddenly shake the earth, prompting Magnus to sharply warn Glance that their target has arrived. The terrifying creature violently smashes through the dense forest foliage, sending debris flying everywhere as it charges toward them. A colossal, horned, demonic beast towers menacingly over the two warriors, blocking out the sun with its massive muscular frame. Magnus rapidly unleashes a barrage of complex incantations, utilizing his supreme staff to multiply the effectiveness of all enhancement spells by 3. Brilliant magical energy erupts from the earth as the sorcerer simultaneously casts multiple high-tier shield, armor, and fire weapon buffs onto his frontline fighter. Wreathed in roaring magical flames, an awestruck Glance marvels at the inexhaustible power surging through his vastly upgraded stats, far exceeding his wildest expectations. Glans marvels at the miraculous, overwhelming power granted to him by the great sorcerer Magnus. The colossal beast unleashes a deafening roar as Glans fearlessly charges straight toward the towering threat. Magnus observes that no normal person would ever dare to charge a monstrous boss head-on without hesitating. He explains that his sorcerer's mental enhancement spell acts similarly to a priest's blessing, completely erasing the paralyzing fear of combat. This powerful magic, combined with the guard's own fierce determination to save Mel, transforms Glans into an absolutely fearless warrior. With his flaming sword sizzling through the air, Glans effortlessly strikes the roaring creature and praises Magnus for making the battle so easy. The massive beast groans in agony as Glans relentlessly pushes his fiery assault forward. Magnus carefully notes that no matter how incredibly strong an attack is, it becomes completely useless if it fails to hit the target. The sorcerer continuously casts agility-enhancing magic to drastically boost his vanguard's speed. Addressing Glans's potential confusion, Magnus explains that the forest giant's eyes and normal weak spots are entirely invulnerable to standard damage. To counter the beast's impenetrable defenses, the clever mage prepares to cast a powerful debuff to cripple its speed. Magnus details his strategy to simultaneously drop the monster's hit chance to 0 while continuously boosting Glans's evasion rate. With a serious glare, the armored guard fully understands his sole directive is to simply avoid getting hit. Roaring with newfound power, Glans wildly clashes against the beast in a dazzling display of fiery strikes. Magnus proudly praises his teammate, admitting that even a solo run would require this exact, tedious cycle of continuous buffs and debuffs. The sorcerer confidently declares that by perfectly combining evasive maneuvers with relentless attacks, they will eventually wear the monster down. Magnus internally celebrates that having a dedicated vanguard significantly reduces the agonizing amount of time needed to defeat the boss. Recalling the encyclopedia's specific tip about the monster's weakness to fire, Magnus activates his interface to massively boost his own magical damage. Stepping forward with absolute authority, the young mage begins chanting a devastating high-tier offensive spell. A colossal, heavily customized pillar of Tier 3 fire erupts from his staff and completely engulfs the battlefield. Glans stares in wide-eyed, absolute shock at the sheer, overwhelming scale of the sorcerer's magical destruction. The demonic beast releases a final, agonizing roar as the fierce battle reaches its blazing climax. The colossal beast is struck directly by a massive, fiery explosion as Magnus's spell lands with devastating force. A heavily battered Glans sighs in relief, while Magnus notes that granting his vanguard the magic shield was a life-saving decision. Magnus realizes that without the extra layer of magical defense, the armored guard would have died instantly from the monster's brutal attack. With the towering beast finally slain and crumbling into ash, Magnus firmly orders Glans to head back to the village. Returning to Enzo Village, the victorious duo is immediately swarmed by a cheering crowd welcoming back the great sorcerer. The relieved villagers gather around the pair, expressing their immense joy that both warriors returned completely unharmed. A group of angry men loudly scolds Glans for disappearing and causing them endless worry, demanding to know if he was a burden to the sorcerer. The village elders quickly intervene and calm the crowd, cheerfully declaring that returning in one piece is all that truly matters. A horde of excited village girls swarms Magnus, squealing in delight at the chance to physically touch the legendary sorcerer. The frantic women practically trample each other to get closer, leaving a completely overwhelmed Magnus struggling to process their intense adoration. Sweating nervously as the girls clamor for his attention, a deeply flustered Magnus wonders why touching him is such a massive deal. A group of excited children vividly recounts the battle, awestruck by the terrifying growls and earth-shattering tremors they felt from afar. Magnus smiles awkwardly at the children's stories, secretly shocked that the monster's dying scream echoed all the way back to the village. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls out for the sorcerer from the back of the bustling crowd. A radiant and fully healed Mel steps forward. her eyes sparkling with tears of absolute joy as she gazes at her saviors. The entire village gasps in sheer disbelief as the previously bedridden girl walks confidently toward the stunned warriors. Mel gracefully bows before Magnus, clasping her hands together in a gesture of profound respect and endless gratitude. The village chief breaks down into heavy tears, endlessly thanking the great sorcerer for pulling his only granddaughter back from the brink of death. Overcome with emotion, the crying chief wails that seeing Mel perfectly healthy again feels like an impossible dream come true. A blushing Mel asks if she can somehow repay the massive favor, acknowledging that the sorcerer successfully hunted the forest creature just to cure her disease. Magnus swiftly steps aside and pushes a startled glance forward, firmly telling the grateful girl to direct her thanks to the scarred warrior instead. The young mage loudly declares that Glans put the most effort into curing her, bravely offering himself as a shield and facing the horrifying monster head-on. Magnus internally praises the armored guard as a true hero who actively fought for his love, deeply contrasting him with the arrogant warriors chosen randomly by fate. Blushing furiously, a heavily flustered Glans attempts to downplay his heroic actions while an amused Magnus forcefully slaps his back. Mel bursts into a bright musical laugh, warmly teasing Glans that his newfound modesty is completely unlike his usual bold attitude. The entire village erupts into enthusiastic agreement, loudly cheering for the embarrassed warrior and declaring that Mel is absolutely right. Unable to hide his embarrassment, a blushing Glans scratches his head and awkwardly chuckles along with the laughing crowd. Standing amidst the joyful celebration, the scarred warrior silently basks in the warm, welcoming atmosphere of his kind-hearted neighbors. Glans is suddenly pulled from his thoughts as Mel softly calls out his name. Mel tenderly embraces the shocked warrior, sincerely thanking him for everything he did and expressing her immense happiness. Watching the heartwarming scene, a thoughtful Magnus realizes the true reason behind Glans's previously lifeless expression. The clever sorcerer deduces that the scarred guard looked so dead inside earlier because he genuinely believed they had absolutely no chance of winning. Shrugging off the deep romantic tension, Magnus mentally admits that he will never truly understand matters of the heart. Staring firmly into the distance, the sorcerer resolves that he must hurry back to Lacusta to see Aria immediately. The entire Enzo Village throws a massive, joyous festival to celebrate their grand victory, filling the streets with dancing and endless rounds of drinks. A horde of cheerful villagers playfully swarms an overwhelmed Glans, aggressively forcing him to drink and join the wild festivities. Meanwhile, Magnus happily munches on a skewer of roasted meat while politely declining a massive jug of alcohol offered by the giggling village girls. The cheerful celebration is suddenly interrupted as the elderly village chief solemnly calls out to the young sorcerer. The old man approaches Magnus with a deeply apologetic expression, sincerely expressing his desire to properly repay the incredible deed. Bowing his head in shame, the chief awkwardly confesses that their humble rural town simply possesses nothing valuable enough to compensate the mage for such a massive favor. Sipping his drink, a calm Magnus mentally notes that he isn't exactly short on cash and would feel deeply uncomfortable accepting money from the humble villagers. Turning back to the desperate village chief, the young sorcerer gently insists that he doesn't need any compensation since he already claimed his true reward. A confident smile crosses his face as he assures the bewildered crowd that claiming the boss monster's rare loot was more than enough payment. Magnus casually explains that hunting the demonic beast was actually a personal quest he had been actively pursuing on his journey. He reveals he had recently been studying the Divine Encyclopedia's detailed entry regarding the infamous forest giant. Holding up a strange, dark object, the young mage explains that the defeated boss had a high chance of dropping a rare item called the Heart of the Grim Forest. The magical tome dictates that handing this specific crafting material over to an elite dwarven mystic blacksmith will yield a completely unique magical artifact. However, Magnus notes that forging the legendary gear requires one additional highly specific material. Holding up a jagged chunk of shattered metal, a thrilled Magnus happily declares that he finally found the missing piece. A confused Glance recognizes the fragment as a piece of his own shattered shield, completely unaware that surviving the intense battle officially transformed it into a valuable relic shield. Laughing off the strange request, the scarred warrior gladly tells Magnus to keep the scrap while noting that standard armories are full of similar junk. Magnus mentally calculates that combining the cursed heart with the relic shield will forge an incredibly powerful item crucial for his future battle against the Demon King. His eyes narrow with intense focus as he fully grasps the incredible potential of his newly acquired crafting materials. Rubbing his head with a humble grin, Glance admits he doesn't understand the complicated magic but is deeply honored to have assisted the great sorcerer. Enjoying the festive village atmosphere, Magnus decides his immediate next step is to track down a qualified mystic blacksmith. Consulting his divine encyclopedia, he easily locates the profile of Bazurf, a notoriously eccentric dwarven blacksmith operating out of Smith Mountain. Snapping the heavy tome shut with a triumphant smirk, the confident sorcerer locks onto his next crucial target. After quickly returning to the bustling Lacusta kingdom, a determined Magnus arrives at a quiet stone workshop and politely calls out for the legendary craftsman. The young mage pauses in mild confusion, surprised by the eerie silence suggesting the dwarven smith isn't even home. Magnus clenches his fist in pure frustration, violently regretting that he cut his perfect date with Arya short just to visit an empty house. Recalling the encyclopedia's strict warning about the dwarf's cranky attitude, a nervous Magnus pushes the door open anyway, despite fearing the owner's wrath. Peering cautiously into the dark workshop, the sorcerer suddenly freezes as a weak, agonizing groan echoes from the shadows. Magnus gasps in absolute horror as he spots a heavily injured figure collapsed on the floor amidst a chaotic pile of scattered forging tools. Rushing desperately into the ruined room, the panicked sorcerer demands to know who brutally attacked the legendary blacksmith.